Now, more of Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Policy Institute, the only show directly addressing the problems and solutions for Illinois. Now, from AM 560, here's Dan Proft.
Dan Proft back with Pat Hughes on this edition of Illinois Rising. Pat Hughes, the co-founder of the Illinois Opportunity Project. And Pat, the 50 trained SEALs, even though 14 of them voted against the Tiny Dancer's property tax hike, essentially moved along this $500 million property tax hike that Rahm didn't want to do. Don't want to raise taxes except as a last resort. That's what we heard during the campaign. And, of course, last resorts become first resorts after the election, so that's what's happened. The impact of this property tax hike on the city of Chicago, as it's already being hollowed out, and those that are actually feel the impact of terrible public policy are leaving.
Yeah, and they're going to continue to leave. It's interesting, Dan, you're right. I mean, that wasn't the election just this spring where he said, hey, last resort. It took him 120 days to get to this last resort, which is not atypical, sadly, for Rahm and the city council. Look, this is the same thing that we talked about in the segment previous. I mean, businesses that pay property taxes, folks who live in Chicago, they're going to go somewhere else ultimately. They're not going to continue to sustain this structural deficits and these small solutions. And by the way, this tax isn't going to solve any long-term problems. Even if they were able to collect all this revenue and people stayed, there's still going to be structural problems that have to be addressed. Yeah,
that's the farce of it. Rahm suggesting that he's stepping up to the plate, because it's always the courage to increase taxes. That's how it's always sold in Chicago and Illinois. Anytime you're raising taxes, that's courageous, despite the fact you've put the city or the state in the position where raising taxes is necessitated, at least as one option, because of the dire financial position of the city and the state. But here's the thing, and this is Mark Glennon and Wire Points, we've talked about on this show before. He's done the math. Just to make the ARC payment next year, the actuarially required contribution to the city pensions, would require a property tax increase 5 times what Rahm passed through the city council this week, and 77% of the revenue generated from that property tax would have to go directly to the police and fire, the 4 city pensions, the 4 city pension systems. So this is completely running in place, essentially, and inflicting punishment on those that can increasingly not afford to finance the punishment in order to run in place.
Yeah, and the temerity of this guy, Dan, I saw him on a press conference after the vote the other day and calling out the 14 aldermen who decided to vote against it by saying, well, they're going to have that on their conscience. That we've passed this tax increase.
It's immoral. It's immoral not to raise taxes.
They're going to have to...
Not Chicago values.
Correct. They have to go see their priest or their rabbi or whomever to get this absolved from...
Shaman.
Right. Or the people who, finance their campaign.
Their life coaches.
Correct. And so that's really the issue, right? So the narrative that comes out of this is you got this guy reelected in April. I'm not going to raise taxes. I'm going to do everything I can to not do that. Literally a blink of an eye later, he raises those taxes, and then he calls out the 14 people. Now, who knows why they voted against it, whether it was based on principle or policy or politics or whatever. But the 14 people who said, look, this isn't going to get anything done. And then he has the you-know-whats to go out and call them out in public.
Yeah, and interesting, too, because I'd love to hear from Rahm Republicans, those Republicans that finance Rahm in the city, those Republicans that lectured me during the campaign about Rahm as the least worst of the available options. How's that going, not just in terms of policy choices he's making at the city, but also that relationship that he's supposed to have with the governor so that we get things done, those tough decisions, the structure. And I'm not talking about tax increases because those are easy decisions, especially in a Soviet-style system like we have in Chicago. But the structural reforms that Bruce Rauner was elected to pursue and is attempting to pursue, those Rauner supporters who also were Rahm supporters, which side do you find yourself on now? Jay Levine at CBS 2 Chicago had a good piece on this on Friday, which included an interview with Tiny Dancer responding to a fairly strong but also fairly accurate statement that was issued by the governor's office. Take a listen.
Rauner's communications chief issued a blistering statement attacking the mayor and his policies. He needs to get serious, Mike Shrimp said, about whether he is a reformer or just another tax and spend politician who wants to blame someone else for their failures.
Is this relationship, which is so necessary, irreparably broken?
I asked the mayor during an interview yesterday.
I find it, as I said, I'm asking you, Jay, go to anywhere else. Is there any other governor who is attacking their economic engine? Anywhere, Republican or Democrat. I think it's a bizarre strategy in an attempt to boost the economy of the state of Illinois, boost the attractiveness to the state of Illinois, that you would be attacking and hoping you break Chicago. You can have partisan differences, policy differences. I'm going to break Chicago as a way to get what I want on collective bargaining.
Governor Rauner, despite being in Chicago today, declined our request for an on-camera interview.
Yeah, that wedding dress was on a little tight with Rahm there. Did Bruce Rauner, has he said he wants to break Chicago? Is Chicago City Hall an economic engine in the state of Illinois, or Chicago's private sector the economic engine?
Well, Dan, first of all, my dad told me when I was growing up that America was the land of opportunity, and it must be, because for that guy to be the mayor of this incredible city and to have made millions and millions of dollars is truly remarkable. I mean, just listen to that interview. He's putting it back on the interviewer because he has no answer. Is he a tax and spend politician? No, he's worse than that. That's too low of a label to put on him. He is actually worse than that. And the people that you talked about, the sort of North Shore or city, Lakeshore liberals who are ostensibly thinking these guys are going to get along. Well, Rauner seems to be doing the right thing, and they made a miscalculation. I think that's because the level of depth of their thought is so shallow, and that's what we're left with.
Yeah, he needs to decide if he's going to be a reformer, Tiny Dancer, that is. I think after 5 years, we know the answer to that question.